Hi, today we're going to be talking about suburban and urban starling management around your yard, home, property, or even farms. When dealing with these urban pest birds, it's important to make sure you know how to identify the species you're dealing with so you don't cause harm to other birds in the area, particularly native birds like grackles and blackbirds. To identify a starling, you can see in this photo here, they're fairly iridescent throughout their whole body. You can see the purple and blue. They can either have a yellow or black beak, as you'll see in a second. With starlings, they typically have these white speckles along their back and sometimes along their bottom. This is a summer starling, so there's less white spots. Here is a picture of a winter starling. You can see they have a lot more of the white speckles across all of them, but this one you can see has the black beak. A bird that you might mistake it for is a grackle right here. They typically have larger beaks for their head size, or have the same iridescence, but typically more up near their head and breast, and are a little bit longer than the starlings. So you want to make sure you can properly identify the starlings, because other birds can be illegal to deal with as they are protected by federal law. So you might wonder why you're getting starlings in the first place. Well, starlings are attracted to a lot of the same things humans are. They like well-trimmed grass where they can see their food sources, often things like grains and stuff that they'll be able to see through the grass. So high grass, generally they don't like those areas just because they don't have the visibility. What will attract them is things like food. Starlings will eat most anything. So if you have trash at your house and keep it outside, you want to make sure it's in a well-sealed bin that they can't get to. You want to make sure it has a lid so they're not just flying in, eating your trash, spreading it around and calling their buddies to come and get more trash. More things that will attract them is if you have feeders for other types of birds, like a suet block right here that we keep for woodpeckers. This will also attract the starlings because, like I said, they will eat most anything. So odds are if you're trying to attract one type of bird, you're going to get starlings as well. One thing that I've seen people do is leave safflower seeds out, not sunflower, safflower. The shells of these safflower seeds are quite a bit harder than some other seeds, so the starlings will have problems eating them, but some native birds like cardinals will be able to eat the safflower. So that is a possibility. Now we're going to talk about some different areas that you might find starlings around your house or property. A big thing is where they will end up roosting during the day or sitting and just hanging out while they're feeding or doing whatever else. A popular place for starlings and other birds to sit are places like your gutters, where they can get a good hold of it and just sit there over a walk, have a nice view of the grass and wherever they might be finding food. There's a couple of popular ways to get them out of there or have them not land there in the first place. One of a good way is there's companies that make piece of wire that you can suspend on posts, much like this, that will go across common places they land. I'm just using a thicker piece of wire here so you can actually see it in the video. The typical wires they use for this are stainless steel, so they won't rust, and are much thinner so they can't land on them. They'll stick about a few inches off the gutter, just so when they try to land, they'll have that wire in the way and they won't be able to, and they won't be able to land on it either. That's a good method to keep them out of certain areas. Another method people use is there's companies that make what they call porcupine wire. A company like Bird Be Gone will make something like this, where essentially it's a bunch of pointed wires that stick up that you will stick down on these areas that these starlings typically land on, and it will be all over the place. So there's spikes here, all over the place, so they cannot land on those areas. They'll get down there, notice it's spiky. It won't hurt the bird, but will prevent it from getting a foothold and landing. Another popular place for these starlings to make nests, because they're cavity nesters, is places, tight corners around your house. So an area like this where it's kind of nestled in, where it's not going to be blown out by the wind. So along chimney lines, roof lines where it's going inwards like this, just places where it won't get nestled out from the wind, cavity type areas. Another place you might want to check is on top of chimneys, if you have this style of chimney, as you can see by looking up at it. There's some cavities that can be formed on top of the chimney where your exhaust is coming out of your house. Starlings are also going to be attracted to areas that have a lot more cover in the trees. So if you look up here, we'll see that this tree is really dense and there's a lot of branches in here. So this is going to cover a lot of good habitat for starlings because they'll be able to hide from predators in here, take shelter from wind and rain. So ideally, when you're looking at your trees on your property that are going to be starling habitat, you want to prune them properly and often so that you can see they're more sparse. The starlings are not going to have the same cover. Granted, there's no leaves right now, but you can see this one just doesn't have all the little branches that are going to be attracting those starlings like we saw before. A couple more places that the starlings, you might find them and have problems with them, are places like satellite dishes. You can see there's a lot of places in here that starlings might be putting their nests. You can see cavities in there, and you don't want them messing with anything electrical because that can be pricey fixes, so you just want to keep them out of there. Areas like gutters where they're coming up and down your house, they'll be able to cram nests in there. We also have things like light fixtures, which starlings and even other birds will go up into or around and create nests inside of those. They can cause problems because with the electrical and the heat from lights, those nests can catch fire every once in a while, and you don't want that problem on or in your house or property. On the pest control market, there's a lot of devices for frightening these birds that I would not quite recommend. There's devices that have flashing lights or lasers. Those may work at first, you might see some immediate results, but the birds will quickly become acclimated and get used to those lights and sounds. So for long term, they're not great options. Oftentimes you'll see sirens or ultrasonic devices. I just don't think those work very well. Again, they may at first to scare the bird, but they'll quickly find out that they're not being hurt by them and will just ignore them completely. A good option for keeping starlings out of areas that you might not want them to be in is netting. This is just some garden netting. You'll be able to find finer netting, more like fish net, to be used for birds at some hardware lawn stores as well as like wild bird stores. For this netting type exclusion barrier, you can hang this in the areas that the starlings are getting into. So if you have eaves, areas like this that the starlings are nesting in, hang it at an angle over this, the starling just won't be able to get into that. The same goes for around trees that starlings are getting into. If you have fruit trees like apple trees, putting netting around those trees will keep the starlings out, as well as things on the side of your house like some satellite dishes. You can hang this around to try to keep the starlings out. Okay. Now we're going to talk about some lethal management methods. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these birds are not protected by federal laws, but when dealing with these birds, you need to make very careful that you're not breaking any local laws or regulations, ordinances that your neighborhoods, cities might have. These are things like sound ordinances. When I talk about frightening devices, the lights and sounds, your neighbors might not like those going off in the middle of the night to scare away the birds, so you got to make sure you're not breaking any local rules. With the lethal methods, you got to be extra careful of this because things like shooting these birds is legal, but obviously around a neighborhood like this, we aren't able to do that. So this more applies to if you're on farm or rural property. You can shoot these birds. However, with how fast these birds tend to reproduce, you have to be going through a lot of them. And again, with the frightening sounds, the shots may scare them, but they will come back afterwards. So it's not always the best method. There are other methods for lethal control, such as starlicide, which is a pesticide formulated specifically for this European starling. Because this chemical is pretty powerful for these birds, you have to be a certified pesticide applicator to purchase and apply this stuff. So it is not for most situations. But if you are looking for that large scale and have your certification, it is important that you pre-bait these birds because, as I mentioned, these birds are not protected, but others are. So you want to make sure that you're not attracting other birds to this toxic bait. So what you will do is leave out food for the starlings, and if there's only starlings coming, then you can put the toxic bait out. But if you have other birds coming to your feeders where you plan on putting the toxin out, you just can't use the toxin as you have the risk of hurting native birds. People who are considering using starlicide as an end-all to their starling problem might be afraid of the effects of it on the environment. Starlicide is actually pretty safe for the rest of the environment as long as you're not having other birds directly consume it. When the starlings will eat the toxic bait, they will metabolize that toxin very quickly within their own bodies, so it is not a risk to other birds that might be scavenging on these starlings after they've eaten the bait. The toxin will pretty much all be gone once the starling is dead and won't be a risk spreading to other animals.